Hello, I'm Leah Miller. Thank you for joining me today. You are going to need a container of water and some paint brushes along with your watercolor paint and some watercolor paper. And we are going to get started by first just doing a wash of water on our paper. So I'm taking my large brush and I'm dipping it in clean water, and I'm just going to paint my entire paper with the clear water. And you can see the water on the paper here. You can see in the light the parts that are dry and the parts that are wet are nice and shiny. I want to get the whole thing covered because what I want to do is put a very light wash of color on my background instead of just having a plain piece of white paper for this particular painting. I think it looks a lot nicer to have a little bit of color in the background. So now my entire paper is wet, and again, I can tilt it around to see in the light any areas that I may have missed, any areas that are still dry. I'll just add water to. And then I'm just going to decide what color I want to put for my background. And I think that I would like to do just a little bit of blue. So I'm just dipping again my big brush because this is just a wash. And you can see I'm adding just the littlest bit of color at the bottom of my page. And I'm just going to pull it up a little bit. So I'm doing a blend. Basically, this is a blend. The bottom of my paper will be lighter, darker. It will have the blue along the bottom. And then as I go up toward the top of the paper, it will actually just blend into just the plain white of the paper. So you don't have to be super careful with this. You basically just blob it on there, and because the paper is wet, the color will blend. It'll blend and smooth out. So I just keep adding a little bit of color at the bottom, again, because I want to have this sort of blended effect of having more color at the bottom of the paper and just having it blend away as we go up the paper. So back and forth, and it's really that simple. Now you can have a little bit of texture. If you move your brush like this, it will leave some marks on the paper, and you have a little bit of texture or differentiation in that color. But I think I want mine smooth. So I'm just taking my brush and just going right back across the paper to just even out the color a little bit. And I still have a little bit of the mark showing. One thing, watercolor paper is not very forgiving. It's not like acrylic or oil paint where you can paint over it very easily. And because I sort of showed you the texture, now my paper has absorbed that color and kind of wants that texture. So I am just gonna build up on that texture a little bit, just to have a little bit of differentiation along the bottom. And that's good. And then it just kind of fades out as it goes up. So I'll leave it like that. I'm putting my brush back in the water. Just don't want the paint to dry on the brush. And I have a hair dryer here, and this speeds things up. When you're working with watercolor, it's always nice to have a hair dryer. So I'm just going to dry my paper. And now my paper is dry, and I can, again, lift it up and see where it might still be wet. You can see there's a little wet spot there. That's okay. That's not going to get in my way for what I'm making now, but everything else is dry. So what I'm going to do next is take small brush, a small round brush, and wet it. I actually have all my brushes in the water while I'm working with watercolor. It just makes it easier. So I have water on my little round brush, and I am going to dip it in the black, but I don't want my paint to be a solid black. So now you can see here. So I have black. You can put it on my palette. Rinsing the black out, and then I'm going to grab a little bit of orange, and I'm going to just mix my orange with my black to make a warmer sort of brownish color. And my paper is dry, so when I put this on my paper, I'm going to have a hard line. If I had not dried my paper, then the line would bleed. That color would bleed everywhere. So I'm going to come up about a third of the way up on my paper, and I'm just going to draw the shape of a tree trunk and a branch. Now you can do this however you want. There's really no right or wrong way. Trees are all different. They all have different shapes, different branches. And so I'm just putting a few branches here. And then you see I'm making the base of the tree slightly thicker. And just kind of pulling it out to the side to show that there's a tree root there. So that's the main structure of my tree. And I did it a really light brown. So I can now go back, rinse my brush out, and get some black paint. Now I know where the tree trunk is. I'm going to add some black to that trunk and just gently lift as I go along the trunk. Now if my color starts to just fall away, then I just add a little bit of water to my brush so that the paint will move really smoothly onto the surface of the paper. Now I am going along here and I'm adding black to the branches that I made before. And as I get near the end of the branch, I lift my brush so that it goes out to a much narrower point if I lift my brush, so I don't press down as hard. And I just add black to all of these branches. Now you'll be able to see a little bit of the brown underneath. It just adds a little bit more realism. You know, tree trunks have lots of colors. If you are out for a walk, take a minute to walk up to a tree trunk and really look at the bark. You'll see grays and browns and blacks and greens and maybe even some blues, maybe even some whites, depending on the type of tree it is. But you'll just see in nature there's a whole lot of variegation. Very few things are just one solid color. So now I've added black to my branches. Now, and let me say, if you have a shaky hand, you're actually going to have much prettier branches because tree branches typically have a lot of curves and shapes and movement. And so if you have a shaky hand, don't feel bad about that. That's an advantage for you actually in this case. So that's the basis of my tree. And I'm going to leave this just like it is. I'm going to put my brush back in water. And I'm going to take my hair dryer again and dry this. So that's dry. Again, I can tilt my paper and see there are no shiny parts on that. So I know that it's dry. And you can see my paper is starting to curl. That is very typical of watercolor paper. When you have really expensive paper, it doesn't curl as much, I'll tell you that, but it still curls some. So that is not uncommon. Now I'm going to take a medium size flat brush. You can use a round brush or a flat brush. As you paint, you will become more comfortable with the brushes and you'll figure out what you like the best. So there's not a right or wrong way to do this. It's really about testing out the different tools and materials and figuring out what works for you. What do you like most and how do you want to use it? So I am taking a medium flat brush. It's flat because it's wide and has a flat top, whereas this one has a rounded top, so it's called a round tip or a round brush. So I'm taking this flat one and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add water around my branch. And you can see if I put water on top of this, it is starting to bleed a little bit, but it probably won't bleed too much, meaning the color won't move away too much. We'll still have that branch. And so I'm just adding water around the ends of the brushes, the ends of the branches. This is a really nice way to paint a tree. And this is a tree in the fall. So we're going to do oranges and yellows. And I'm going to start with my yellow because it's the lightest color. It's the least powerful color. So you can't put yellow back on top of a darker color. It just won't show up. But you can put it down first. And you can see where this color is bleeding, just moving around in the water. And so I'm just going to tap it around here. It can run in front of the branches and out to the sides, as big as you want to make it, or as small as you want to make it. So I can see that my black paint is starting to bleed a little bit. So I'm drying off my brush and then I'm just touching it where there's an extra amount of water, just to pull some of that water up so it doesn't bleed too much. I actually like the way it looks, and because this is really a loosely done painting, we're not doing anything that's super realistic, it doesn't really bother me for those to blend. But if it bothers you, you can actually take your paper towel and just dab right on the paper. When you do that, you can see it pulls up the color. So if I want to get rid of some of this yellow up here, I can just take my paper towel and just press it down there, and almost all of that yellow is going to go away. But I don't want to do that, so I'm going to put it back. So I just added some more water, taking more yellow paint, and I'm dabbling my yellow. Now, the more paint you have on your brush, of course, the more paint is going to transfer to your paper. So it's really decide how much you want. You can also do layers. So you can let this dry and then come back over it with another coat of yellow to make that stronger. But while it's wet, I'm also going to get some orange paint. And I'm going to bring some orange paint in here. And you can see I'm not being super careful. I'm letting this water do some of the work for me. So that water is going to blend that color, blend the yellow and the orange together. And I'm just dabbling it around where I want it to go. If I feel like there's too harsh of a color, I'll dip my brush in water again and then blend it just by touching the brush, the wet brush, into the paint. I'm going to add some red. So I'm dipping my brush, getting a lot of red on my brush, and I'm going to come in here and just touch some red down onto the paper. And I like the way the colors are blending where the paper's wet and creating some really harder lines where it's dry. I kind of like the look of that. I might come in here with the corner of my brush and just touch in here to give the idea that maybe there's some individual leaves right in this area. I'm going to come back in, just put more red on my brush, coming back in here again to add some depth to this by adding more red. Rinse my brush out. Now, you know, when the leaves on trees begin to change with the coming of fall, they don't all change at once. There's a little bit of a transition. So some of the leaves will be yellow, some of them will be a darker gold, some will be red, some may still be green. So what I think I'll do is take my brush and get a little bit of green paint on my brush. I'm going to mix it over here with because it's such a bright green, I'm going to mix it with that brownish color that I used for the first outline of my tree. And I'm making this sort of a darkish green color. I'm going to come over here. Might need to do a little bit more. And I'm just going to add a little bit of depth by letting some of that green show in here in a few places, not everywhere. I'm just kind of deciding where I want it. One thing to think about when you're painting is creating harmony in your picture, and doing that by having some balance with colors that make your eye move all the way around the image. I'm going to have this side of the tree a little bit darker with that green, just adding more of that green in here. So there's just a little bit over here. The bulk of it is up in this area and over here to the right. And as I look at this, I'm just adding colors where I want them. So it's really about personal choice. And then to really make it look like there's light and dark, which is the way it is in real life, we're going to have darks in here. I'm going to come back around to where some of my branches are, and I'm taking black, watering it, you know, have the water on my brush, so putting it over here on my palette, and I'm just going to come right along where I need a little bit more black than that. Where my branches are, I'm adding some black, because around the branches of the tree, that's where most of the leaves are. So that's where the deepest colors will be. So just around the end of the branches, just coming in here with some darker colors, just to create that light and dark, that contrast that comes with shading. Comes with a tree, comes with any image that has light on it. You're going to have areas of light and dark. So I'm just touching my brush to the paper and just dabbling it around to create these lights and darks. So I like the way that looks. I think I might come in here where I put those little extra leaves and add a little bit of dark there toward the center of the tree where there would be a bit more shadow as well. And I feel like I got that center point a little dark, so I'm rinsing my brush out, drying it off, and then dabbing it right here in this area to just pull some of that color back out, because I decided I didn't like the way it looked. But I don't want to have a white spot there or a very light spot there. So I'll come back in, maybe I'll get a bit of yellow on my brush and tap the yellow down into this area that turned a bit whiter than I wanted it to be. I want it to have a little more color than that. I might come back in with some orange. Wetting my brush, getting the paint on it. Got a little bit much, so I'm just dabbling it off there. So yeah, I'm kind of liking how that looks. So now what I need to do is turn my hair dryer back on and dry this off. And then we'll add some branches and we'll be done. Now I am going to go back to my round brush that I started with. I'm rinsing it out, drying it off. And actually I'm going to add a little bit more water back onto it. I'm going to take this, the brown and the black that I started with earlier. Now that my tree is dry, I'm going to come in and add some more branches. And I'm going to do this just very, very lightly. I'm not pressing too hard on the paper. I'm just using the tip of the brush. And you'll know as you do this, if there's an area that's still wet, this will bleed, but that's okay. So you can barely see that little branch. I'm going to add some of those super light branches because I like the way they look. If you have a smaller brush, you can use it. It's really, again, whatever you like, whatever works for you. And these trees really have a lot of really wiggly branches. So again, if you have a shaky hand, use that to your advantage. So I'll give you an example. If I want to use a smaller brush to do some really smaller branches, this is a liner. It's called a liner brush. It's longer bristles, but really, really thin. So I'll wet that. I'm going to get some black paint on my brush. Bring it over here to my palette. And then I can come in here with my little liner and make tiny little branches. And if they don't connect, it's okay, because when you look at a tree, you don't see the whole branch typically. You're just going to see those branches that are showing through the leaves. And I'm not going to put a ton of branches in here, just a few, just enough to sort of show that there are branches, that this is a tree. And there's really no way you can mess this up because every tree is different. And trees have lots of different shapes. So again, there's really no wrong way to do it. But I'm very gently pressing down with this liner so that I get small, skinny little lines for these branches. I might come out here and put some that aren't even connected to this branch down here, but that work because again, we can't really see the entire branch when we're looking at a tree. We just see parts of it. And I'm going along the branches I created earlier, just defining those a little better where I want to, letting them blend into the background where I don't want to. Basically, that's it. So you have a finished winter tree, or excuse me, fall. So I'll edit that. That's it. So you have a finished fall tree. Now this is the simple version. You can come back in and put as many details as you want. You can take your round brush and add some color to it and come back in and really add some stronger leaves, more strongly defined leaves there if you want. If you do that, just know that you don't want to do them evenly all the way down. So for example, if I do this, that's not what a branch normally looks like with leaves on it. It's really going to have a kind of a collection of leaves on top of one another like this, with maybe some out further away. So you can come back in and make this as detailed as you want. You can bring some reds and just layer those on top. There's a lot of ways to make it a little bit more challenging if you feel like you want to do that. So I'll just come in and kind of tuck some colors in here like I'm talking about, and then you can see the difference between what we did earlier and where we're going now. I'm just sort of wiggling my brush along, getting a little bit of red, adding a little water when I need to, coming back in with some orange, really covering up the branches in places, and then going out to the edge of where my color was. So you can make this a little more challenging just by coming in and adding more color on top of what you've already done. It's really up to you. Now I might come down here where this one is, and I may add some more yellow. Maybe I'll come in here with yellow color. But you can see there's a big difference between what we started with, which was very loose and soft, and this more detailed look that we're going with. I tend to like the softer look, so I'm adding a little water to blend this. I like the way it looks when it's all blended together, more abstract, hinting at the tree, hinting at the leaves. I find that to be really beautiful. So it just goes back to what you prefer, what your interest is, what you like most. There's no wrong way, so it's however you want to make it. And when I look at this and look at it as maybe a finished piece, I think my blue is too bright. So if I wanted to dull the blue down, I might come in here with an orange. They're opposite colors. Orange and blue are opposite. So I could come in here and put an orange wash on top of that blue just by watering down some orange paint. And then that would really, really sort of dull down that bright blue. So again, it's really your preference, what you like, how you want your painting to look. And if I do this, I may just, again, let it blend with what I already have up here, but let it fade away. By the way I would do that is to rinse off the color of my brush and just come up here with plain water. And now that brown, which actually the orange that I added that makes it look a little bit more brown, is just going to blend with this edge. So that just really sort of tamps down that bright blue, makes it look a little more like fall. But it's your preference. It's what you like. There's no wrong way. So I can keep working with this because I love to paint. So I'm going to stop now because I'll keep going and adding, and it's very tempting to do that. You keep painting if you want, but this is the end of our tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join us again. Thanks so much and have a great day.